resting on my knee, warm and tender as he
Looks like it's
can
about
be.
9 o'clock, so we'll get this meeting started. I'll call the meeting to order. I know Mr. Keller is out this morning, but can we do an official roll call this morning?
Roll call. Chairman Mike Keelborn.
Here.
Vice Chair Dave Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Barry Keller. Commissioner Michael Jordan.
Here.
Commissioner Megan Burney. And Liaison Bendy White.
Super.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any changes to the agenda this morning?
Yes. Not the agenda. Sorry.
No, Mr. Chair.
No. Okay. All right. We'll move on to item number 4 is public comment. We have any public comment this morning? Doesn't look like it. Okay. We will move on to the consent items. We have 5A and 5B. We have the meeting minutes, and then we have a contract for asset management support services for El Estero. Any comments or questions?
Yes. For the meeting minutes 6E, the part under the motion mentions that the Water Commission had comments that differed from the recommendation to lift the lawn watering ban on. Anyway, and a number of members were concerned about amending the conservation target from 40 to 30. That didn't sound exactly correct to me. If I remember correctly, we all supported reducing the conservation target to 30%, and I'd like it to say that some of the members objected to lifting the lawn watering ban. I just read this a couple times. I was like, what does that say? So I just wanted to be very clear about those two things, that we did support the conservation reduction, but did not support the lawn. Not all of us did not support the lawn watering ban.
Okay.
Okay, any other comment, Mr. Chair, if I could? I was absent for this meeting, but all the items were listed as 401. In the minutes, when you do 401, one is an abstention. An abstention isn't absent. Abstention is that you're present, but you don't vote on the matter. So all the votes should be 4-0 without the 1.
Okay.
Okay. And just a constructive comment, we have a consent calendar, right? So when you have a consent calendar, you usually make a motion to approve the consent calendar, which are all the items on there, one motion. And so the minutes would show that the consent calendar was approved 4-0, and then just listing the items which are down below it,
Yeah.
rather than individual votes all the way through.
Yes.
But with those, well, I can't recommend it. I wasn't here. I can't.
I'll recommend with those changes.
All right. Thank you for noting those things. Good thing we have someone that's got those details down.
Is that
Okay.
a motion then?
Yeah, so we
I'll
have a
second.
motion and a second to approve with the changes. And then does that also include item 5B on the consent? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I have to abstain since I wasn't here last week, and that would be on item A.
Okay, so for the next meeting minutes,
It actually would show.
it will be broken
two
down.
votes.
So it'll be,
So there,
it'll be,
hoisted on my own petard.
yeah. So the meeting minutes will be approved 3-0-1, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then the
5B
5B
is
will be
4-0.
4-0. Yeah, okay. Perfect. All right, we'll move on to item 6A, the Braemar Lift Station project. Mr. Arroyo.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Lisa Arroyo, Wastewater System Manager. I'm pleased to be here today to present to you the design for the Braemar Lift Station Rehabilitation Project and the La Colina Force Main Rehabilitation Project. I'm going to start today's presentation with the Braemar project. Braemar Lift Station is located at the corner of Cliff Drive and Allen Road, and there's a picture of the Braemar Lift Station in case you're not familiar with it. Braemar pumps wastewater from the collection system serving portions of Hope Ranch, Campanile, Arroyo Barrow Beach, and the Allen Road neighborhoods. Braemar pumps the wastewater from basically the corner of Cliff Drive and Allen Road up Cliff Drive to Mesa Lane, where it transitions to gravity sewer. The two force mains that we have are approximately 3,200 linear feet, and so they are fairly lengthy for force mains. The Braemar project, it was the lift station itself was constructed in 1962, and we did do some significant improvements to it in the 1990s. It is the city's largest lift station with a pumping capacity of about 1,000 gallons per minute. And it's also, as you can see from the blue dot and the creek, it's right adjacent to Arroyo Burro Creek. So we consider this to be one of our most critical lift stations because of the capacity and the proximity to the creek. If we were to have some type of a catastrophic failure, we would be pumping upwards of 1,000 gallons per minute of raw sewage directly into the creek, which would go right into the ocean. Back in 2012, Brown and Caldwell prepared a lift station and force main condition assessment report. In that report, they identified at Braemar that we should be installing a second force main to provide additional redundancy and reliability for the lift station. We did that in 2016, and here's a picture of some of the construction of that second force main. And in 2016, we also installed some isolation valves. We replaced the current isolation valves on our pumps. We were hoping to wait till this project came forward, but unfortunately we weren't able to exercise the valves, and we were at risk every time we wanted to do work on our pumps, so we had to do those in advance of this project. Still, more work needs to be done at the Braemar lift station, and so we went out for proposals in late 2016. 3 firms responded. Corolla was identified as the top consultant for the design work, and M&S Engineers was identified as a top consultant for construction management. As you can see from the construction here, we're concerned about the construction in the overall area and the neighborhood, because we've got the force main project that we just did. We have the valve project we did. We've got the roundabout that's currently going on right now. And right at the heels of that, we're going to be looking at another major project in that neighborhood. So one of the things we want to do is get our construction management team on early and start working with the neighborhood to try to identify things that we can do to lessen the impacts to construction to the neighborhood. This isn't something we would normally do, but we feel that in this particular case it's very prudent. The scope of work for the project, first of all, the goals are going to be to replace the aging equipment. We have odor control and corrosion issues, and we also have operation and maintenance issues. So this project will address all of those with the goal of having this lift station complete, not have to do anything other than routine maintenance for the next 20-25 years. The scope of work is to, first of all, replace the pumps with new pumps and VFDs, or variable frequency drives. One of the things the VFDs will do is help us with the odor control and the corrosion issues. Back in 2015, we did a study on the H2S issues that we were having, the hydrogen sulfide issues. And we tried some chemical additions to try to mitigate some of the odor and corrosion. And we went through 3 different test phases. And at the end of the day, we feel that chemical additions in a lift station in a neighborhood environment with the ongoing costs wasn't the best approach. And so we took a look at the VFDs, and we feel that the VFDs will really help us with this lift station. Currently, our pumps work on a fill and draw mode, and it takes a little over 4 cycles for the wastewater to get from the wet well through the force main because of its length and transition to gravity. And in all that time, it continues to build that H2S, and with a variable frequency drive, we'll be able to have that constant flow through the force main and hopefully achieve the same result, that lower odor issue, less corrosion, with a mechanical solution versus a chemical solution. And at the same time, we would be replacing our aging infrastructure, and we expect to have some energy efficiencies with the new pumps as well. In addition, we'll have to get a new motor control center, or MCC. We're planning to rehabilitate the wet well, and as part of that, we're looking at reconfiguring it. Right there, you'll see the cleaning process of the wet well from 2014. The orange is our pumper. Every time we go and clean our wet well, we have to pump, do bypass pumping, which puts us at risk for spills. And we do that about twice a year. So as part of this, we're going to be looking at a way that we can temporarily bifurcate the wet well so that we can pump half of it down, clean it, while the other one half stays in service. In addition, we'll be replacing the ventilation system, upgrades to the SCADA system, and we'll also be taking a look at our existing surge tank and generator, doing a condition assessment during the preliminary design phase, and determining if any work needs to be done on those two pieces of equipment as well. The project's timeline, first 6 months we'll be doing preliminary design work. Second 6 months we'll be doing final design, and we should be in construction about a year from now. We plan on using the 2018 money for construction of the project. I have a year-long window for construction. Active construction is not expected to take a year, but when you have to procure pumps, VFDs, motor control centers, things like that, it takes a while for us to procure and get the equipment on site, so I would expect the actual active construction window to be somewhere around 3 to 6 months. As far as costs for the Braemar project, we're looking at about $375,000 for design, $2.2 million for construction, with a total project cost of around $2.6 million. Moving on to the La Colina Force Main Rehabilitation Project, again going back to the 2012 Brown and Caldwell report, they identified as a critical item the force main at La Colina Pump Station. It is a 3,100 lineal foot force main that was originally constructed in about 60 years ago. It's made of ductile iron pipe, and it had a couple of repairs done to it and was at risk of failure. Their recommendation was to install a second redundant force main and then go back and rehabilitate the original force main at a later date. In 2015, we did construct the second force main, so that portion of the work has been done, but we now need to go back and take a look at the original force main. This is a tough neighborhood to work in. La Colina is a very congested neighborhood. It's got two schools, Bishop Diego as well as Hope School, and also Sansum is down there on the corner as well. So similar to last time, we'll do a lot of outreach with the neighborhood. We're expecting this project to go a little bit faster and smoother because we're hopefully rehabilitating the original force main versus doing a whole new main. One thing that's important right now on this project is when we took the original force main out, this is a picture of it, it is in very poor shape and we are no longer able to keep it in service. So in essence, we are down to one force main at La Colina. And so there's a sense of urgency and to get this project constructed. This is the same timeline as Braemar. However, we're expecting to accelerate it a little bit and finish final design before summer and ideally do construction in the summertime when school is out. I expect construction to go fairly quickly once we get into it because we're rehabilitating an existing line, and that goes very quickly once we actually start active construction.
Just ask the simple question. When you're rehabilitating an existing line, you don't have to trench then, or do you?
No, you don't have to do traditional trenching, but what we'll have to do because of the length, we'll have to dig intermittent pits so that they can put their
sleeves and
so they can put the liner in, cure it. You can only go so long before you have to do another section.
Right, okay.
As far as costs go, we're looking at roughly $150,000 for design, construction. I'm estimating $1.1 million. I'm hopeful that will be much less. It's quite possible that this may need to have a lot of point repairs or doing a rehabilitation is not suitable and we may need to go with some other type of trenchless technology. We'll know that as we get through the preliminary design phase. So the total project cost on this is estimated at about $1.2 million. And that concludes my presentation, and we'll be looking today to have a positive recommendation from the Water Commission to support our staff recommendation to Council of awarding a contract to Corolo for this work.
All right, any questions or comments?
I have one, but it really just applies to La Colina and the challenging area it is. I imagine when you do these projects, eventually you let them go to Public Works for the management of it. So it's probably not a comment to you guys, but the one that was done on the Mesa is pretty much ground zero for where I live, particularly the intersection of Mesa Lane and Cliff Drive. And that was by far, in the projects that I drive around through and among in town, one of the poorest handled on-the-ground projects that I can remember in terms of traffic barriers and signage. Stuff was left up over the weekend, blocking roads off when there was no work being on. Detour signs were still flashing on Cliff Drive when there was nobody working, that type of thing. And so I'm glad you guys recognize that there will be a challenge in the La Colina instance, but I think that's something that you need to pass along in the RFP process and the project management, that there are challenges there and they need to be addressed rather than just somebody does a bid and then what ends up out operationally on the street is sort of mayhem and there's no recourse once it's awarded.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, appreciate your feedback on that, actually, because it was a frustration for us as well. The contractor, unfortunately, we go with the low bid process, and the contractor on that job who met the qualifications for the job seemed to struggle with some of the basics of that job. And in fact, there were times when we did not pay them for their traffic control because it was so poor. But we hear you loud and clear on that, and it's hopeful we can put some more teeth in the next spec that we put out such that we can better manage even a challenging contractor should we get one.
Just one other minor question on Braemar one. Do we have a staging area on site there? That's a pretty small site.
Not a lot of room. We usually we're going to have to stage on the street. There's a little bit of room. This is slightly different. We're not going to have all of the pipeline like we did with the force main. But you're still, that's about what you're limited to.
Yeah.
And you still have to make sure you have access for our crews in case there's some type of an emergency where we have to respond. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things, we did it with the La Colina project. We did their force main. We'll do it with the neighborhood here. Maybe try to identify a place with the neighborhood's help of where's it best for the contractors to stage.
Are you ready for motion?
I just had a question about the odor control for Braemar. Are the odor issues at the lift station itself or at the discharge manhole?
Both.
Both. So we're looking at options for
Correct.
patients.
We feel that the VFDs will help solve the discharge area. One of the things that was successful with one of the chemical additions we did was an aerator, a Little John type of aerator that was put into the wet well. It helped break down the grease mat and get air into there, which will help with controlling the H2S. So we're hopeful that between those couple of things, we'll be able to address it.
Okay. And then I just want to make a comment on La Colina. The pipe condition looks pretty bad, so hopefully you're looking at pipe bursting or something for trenchless methods. Or are you looking at a liner? Or like
we're looking at the CIPP liner. We're hopeful that would be best suited for it because it would be the cheapest, the easiest, the fastest.
Okay. Just keep in mind there's special considerations for pressure pipeline applications for that technology. So
yeah.
Okay. So we are looking for a motion to approve the.
I move staff recommendation to council.
A second.
I'll second.
All right. I have a first and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nope.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We'll move on to item number 6B, contract for laboratory information management system replacement. Miss Galen Fair.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Galen Fair. I'm the laboratory supervisor. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about the Laboratory Information Management System Replacement Project. But before we get into the project, I want to give you guys a little bit of background of what the lab is. So the Water Resources Laboratory, we're a part of the Public Works Department in the Water Resources Division. And we support the wastewater treatment, and water distribution sections. And what we do for them is we perform all of the analytical testing, both operational and regulatory testing, for the city's water and wastewater facilities. So I'm going to show you a little bit about those facilities before we move on to the project. El Estero Wastewater Plant, we have roughly 6.1 million gallons a day coming in. A lot of that's due to water conservation. Obviously, we have a capacity of 11 million gallons. That's all coming from our 257 miles of sewer main, so we support those guys in their testing. On the drinking water side of things, we have Cater Water Treatment Plant, their surface water plant, and we're producing about 9.5 million gallons a day there. We also have Ortega Groundwater Treatment Plant. We have 4 supply wells that are treated at that plant, and we're getting roughly just a little under 2 million gallons a day from those guys. We also have 4 production wells throughout the city. We're getting about 1 million gallons a day combined from there. And to get all that water to our customers, we have roughly 26,000 service connections in the system. We also have 36 dedicated sample sites where we can do our testing for the distribution system. So a little bit about the lab. We have a lab supervisor, myself. We have 2 coordinators, one for the laboratory and one for pretreatment, and we have 4 lab analysts, which do all the sampling and testing. We are staffed 7 days a week, and the lab staff are the ones that go out and collect samples, as well as doing the testing for the treatment plants, groundwater wells, and distribution system. We get about 15,000 samples a year and 45,000 tests. So of those 45,000 tests, 99% of those we do in-house. We only contract out about 1%, and the reason we do that is it's usually more advanced instrumentation that's required, so it doesn't make sense for us to purchase the advanced instruments when we're only doing it maybe 3 to 4 times a year. We participate in various special projects and studies, and then we also have a very in-depth quality assurance and quality control program for the laboratory so that we can meet certification requirements. And that certification is from the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, or ELAP. And the lab is certified in 3 different fields: wastewater, drinking water, soil and biosolids, and that's all to support our water and wastewater treatment plants. And the biggest part about this certification is the annual proficiency testing. And what that is, it's basically a blind study. We receive unknown samples. We run the samples as we would with our normal procedures, and then we turn in those results. And if we pass, great, we get certified. If not, then we have to really look at our processes and see what's missing. For the past, I want to say 10 years since I've been here, we've passed 100% every year. So that's a little bit about the lab. So what is this LIMS, and why do we need it? So LIMS is the Laboratory Information Management System, and it's a software that helps improve laboratory efficiency. It's a data and sample management system. It organizes and stores sample information and analytical results, and it gives us reporting capabilities. So of those 45,000 tests that we do every year, we need a way to kind of data mine and pull those out and put them in reports for our regulatory agencies and other city departments. So with our existing system, this is why we need to upgrade. It has been in use. It's an enterprise system since 2007. So in the software world, 10 years of a software system is it's a long time. With our existing software, we have limited functionality, minimal reporting functions, no tracking of reagents and supplies. We don't have ability to compare results to our regulatory limits, and we can't pre-log sample routines. Pre-log routine samples. Also, the software and the hardware is getting a little outdated. We're working with Windows 7 configuration, which is still okay, but as more and more versions come out, we're going to fall further behind with that software. Also, we have some software patches that are no longer supported by Microsoft with this existing system we're using. The existing system, we have very limited flexibility, no flexibility actually. With changing regulations, we need to be able to adapt to that. This software can't exactly do that. We cannot adjust or edit any reports. They're all static at this point. If we do need to make any changes, we have to contact the software programmer. The city staff cannot do it. So obviously, if we're hiring the programmer for every small thing, that gets pretty pricey. And then the last thing with this current LIMS, it's high risk. The programmer, he's sole source. It's a one-man shop. So if he decides to retire tomorrow, we're at a loss. We can no longer get support for the software. And then our hardware is pretty antiquated. It could fail at any time. We're kind of battling some of those issues right now. We've got some fixes, but it's getting to that critical point. So we need a new system. So how do we go about getting that? We went through and did an RFP process. We hired in February of 2016 Asterix Technology Group, and they're a consultant that specializes in LIMS implementation. And they helped us do a needs assessment as well as develop the RFP. And the biggest part of that was they put together, it was probably a 30-page spreadsheet that each vendor had to respond to with very specific performance criteria. So that was huge help for us. So with the RFP evaluation, we had 4 vendors respond. 3 of those vendors were shortlisted and asked to come out here and demonstrate their product. From those demos, it was clear and obvious there was one front runner. They received the highest scores. That was EthoSoft and their XLIMS software. So we did some background checks, checked their references, and every single person that I spoke with highly recommended the software. And they were similar labs, municipal labs, and they just really spoke very highly of them. So they're the ones we have selected. EthoSoft Incorporated, XLIMS is the software, and these are some of the points on why we chose them. The software requires little to no customization or use of additional software. So some of the other vendors were asking us to buy another module for, say, reporting purposes. Everything's all included in this one. It's a very user-friendly process, and that is very important for our everyday users. So inputting sample data, pulling up reports, an easy process. I think this is one of the big points is these administrative tools. This software is going to allow lab staff to configure anything any way we want to, whereas in the past we had to have the programmer come out. So with changing regulations, our workflows could change. We now will have the ability to make those changes ourselves. We can get electronic data from our contract labs and import it directly into LIMS. So those 1% of tests that we send out, now we can get a report from them and upload it directly into the LIMS. And we don't have to worry about any transcription errors or dual data entry. And that's going to be great. One other thing, the vendor has experience with integrating regulatory reports. They pulled up the exact report in their demo of what I do every month. So again, it helps with dual data entry and putting those reports together. Saves time. So here are our estimated project costs. Obviously, the big cost is going to be the licensing. We're going to do 5 concurrent users, $52,900. They're going to come out and do a requirement analysis. So they're going to come out for a week and do some data gathering and really see what our workflows are so they can configure the system exactly to our needs. And there's also instrument and SCADA integration. So some of our advanced instrumentation where we in the past have written down on a piece of paper the results and then gone over to the LIMS and typed it in. Now that can be directly uploaded to the LIMS system. We have 10 reports that we're asking them to configure, and those are some of those regulatory reports, so that's another good chunk of change for the total costs. We have data migration, so we have to take those 10 years of data we have in our existing LIMS system and migrate it over, so they're going to put it in kind of a data warehouse so that we can access that data through the new software system should we need to pull up any historical data. We've got installation and training. They will come out and install and then train staff as well on how to use the system. They're going to do that both during the entire process and at the very end. They will come out and do kind of a more intensive process. And we've got 1 year of escrow and some hardware for $2,500, and hardware is going to be printers, barcode scanners, stuff like that we will need. So we have a total of $122,970 for the project. And next, our timeline. So obviously we're here today to ask for some recommendations to go to council, and then on council, May 2nd is what we're shooting for. At the end of May, the vendor will come out and do a project kickoff and data gathering. They will then take all that information that they gathered back to their offices and do the data configuration and LIMS configuration of the software. We've got our installation and testing for a good period of time, and that's something that we will be doing both through like a WebEx about every week during that time period and when they come out to do the final testing. And we're really hoping for a go live and project completion date of January 1st, start off the new year with the new system. So our recommendation today is to go to council with these issues, these recommendations, authorize Public Works Director to execute a service contract with Ethosoft, and that $135,000 is the $122,970 you saw earlier, plus 10% for extra services. And then in addition to that, we would like to have the General Services Manager authorized to issue purchase orders in subsequent years for support and maintenance. And that is all I have. If you have any questions.
One question and a couple comments. So is the licensing fee one time, or is it annually?
It is a one-time.
Okay. And then I just have a couple suggestions on cleanup. Your PowerPoint and your agenda report have different numbers for your annual tests and the year you started using the old LIM.
Oh.
So one says 2006, the other says 2007, one says 45,000, the other says 50,000. You might want to clean that up before then. And then just personally to me, it would be more attractive too on that slide that showed that one of the reasons for switching is you have a dollar cost anytime you have to call the sole guy and have him configure something. What is that annually? Is it $1,000?
Okay.
Is it $10,000? You know, the slide you had up 3 or 4 slides ago that show all the reasons to move is pretty much a slam dunk. But that just be my suggestions to kind of clean up the PowerPoint.
I have 2 questions. First is, does this new system work okay with our existing operating system? And if we upgrade in the future to like a Windows 10 or something beyond that, how do we integrate the new software into the new operating system?
IT was very much involved. We had Kazi come out with the demos and all of their specs with the RFP that they returned. We sent over to our IT department to make sure that they met the specs. Along with upgrading, this vendor has been in the business, I believe, about 10 years, so they've shown that they can keep moving with upgrades with software.
I think since this isn't a proprietary LIMS system like our last one, the vendor will be making regular upgrades to it because there's multiple users of this same platform, and so I think I think it will stay up as software continues to upgrade.
Yeah, I guess the reason I was asking is like if there's some reason that we do have to upgrade our software, is that cost included, or like are we thinking about that? So I don't want to get caught off guard and you're like, oh wait, it doesn't actually work with what we already have. So any other comments? Nope. Okay. Looking for a recommendation to bring this to council.
I'll move to recommend.
Second.
First, second. All right. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Nope. Okay. All right. Thanks, Caitlin. We'll move on to item number 6C, the water meter replacement program status update. Ms. Taylor.
Good morning. I'm Kathy Taylor. I'm the city's water system manager, and I'm here with Teresa Lancy, who is a water distribution supervisor over the meter program and the meter readers. And we're talking about meters, and Joshua Hagmark has a meter that we're going to pass around, but please, for your own safety, do not remove the end caps. They are razor sharp, and I'm telling you this from my personal experience where I sliced my finger very badly. So we did bring our prop here. So I will start off the presentation, and Ms. Lancy will finish it. So the water meter replacement program update.
There's like 4 guys sitting here that the moment you say that, we want to start removing the
That's right, exactly. I opened it up and put my finger on it, and it wasn't pretty. So the overview of today's presentation, the metering program goals, metering replacement update, water loss, which is bench testing, and what our next steps will be for the program. So our program goals, number 1 is to improve our customer service. We also seek to have equity amongst our ratepayers and seek for public trust and high regard, and also to function with compliance with the AWWA meter maintenance guidelines. So the city's water meters, we have 27,000 meters, 24,000 which are residential. The others are larger for commercial use. The projected lifespan of a meter is 15 to 20 years. And as the meters age, they are prone to under-registering the use. And I came to the commission in 2014 with this program for changing out the water meters, and at that point, 30% of the water meters were beyond 20 years and when the program began. And I'm proud to say that as of April 2017, 3 years later, the number is down to 9%. So we've really been at it hard, and we've made a lot of good gains. How we use our meters, we use them to recover costs for water use in a fair and equitable manner. We use them to manage their system-wide water use, so we know how much water we are producing and is being consumed. And we also use our water meters to communicate the water use to customers, which has been extremely important, especially in recent years with the drought. And with this communication, we use the information to help them understand their water use, encourage their water conservation, and also assist with leak detection. So this is an overview map of the city and the areas of where we have been replacing meters. And in 2014, we were over in the orange area on the Mesa, and that's where we were focused. We've replaced most of those meters. In 2015 is the green, in 2016, and you can see where we are in progress in the blue and the yellow area, and the remaining is the gray. And I can say that we've done most of them. We've taken the low-hanging fruit. We've had a few meters that are just we couldn't get to right now, whether there's roots that are have entangled these meter boxes, or we need concrete cutting. So we're going to look at those probably next year to see how we want to attack those. This slide is a slide of the meters replaced as of April 2017 per size of meter. So on the x-axis, you have your 5/8 inch meters, where it shows that we have, of the 20,581, we've replaced over 12,000. In the 3/4 inch, we've of 1,187, we've replaced just over 900. And in 1 inch meters, we have almost 4,000. We've replaced almost 3,200. And an 1.5 inch, we have 797, where we've replaced 334, and the 2-inch meters, 840. Out of the 840, we have replaced 161 meters. Who's been doing this replacement? Our work crews. It's been done in-house. We have 3 two-man crews, which includes 3 hourly staff. We found that this approach, rather than having a contractor come in and do it, has provided us better control over the costs and the schedule. Also, by having the work done by in-house workforces, it's allowed us a holistic approach that for the meter maintenance. So not our staff, not only just replacing the meters, they're also evaluating them, they're replacing them, they're recataloging them. If a customer valve needs to be replaced, they'll address that. If the meter box needs to be reset or changed out, they will do that as well. It would be really hard to quantify that and properly describe it in a spec. So I believe that the approach that we've taken has really been a cost saver. Again, the additional maintenance that they've been able to perform, this is a picture of a meter and a meter valve in the box. We've replaced 1,429. And the meter box improvements, we've done 2,980. And that, I must say that's really important because we've had claims against the city for meter boxes where the meter boxes have not been kept up, and we've had trips and falls. So it's really important that that we make these improvements and keep our meter replacement boxes safe for the public. As for the public outreach, the staff they've done an excellent job with the public outreach, and I want to give Teresa Lancy here the credit for that. She's really has spearheaded this effort and putting the notifications in the utility bill. She's been responsible for posting updates on the Nextdoor neighborhood social network. Also, there's been on-site contact by the meter crews prior to the meter replacements to make sure people aren't in the middle of a shower or doing their laundry when we're trying to replace their meter. We leave door hangers at the customer's property once the meter's replaced, so they know if were gone, they come home and they know that their meter has been replaced. And Teresa's also made sure that to post the meter replacement program information on the city's website. So it's been really multifaceted, and we've tried to reach the customers and communicate to them in as many different ways possible. We also have Teresa has also set up a very detailed inventory control program for the meter replacement. It's a very detailed process to ensure the meter exchange data is accurate. As you know, we use these meters for billing purposes. And the old meters have a 6-week retention schedule before we recycle them. So if someone has a question about their old meter, we're able to pull it out, and if needed, we can bench test it and tell them what the performance of that meter was. And the new meters are all field verified. The meter selection, the water distribution staff performed an exhaustive selection process. They really researched it, looked at a lot of different meters. They contacted other water agencies and visited some as well. And they came up with a meter that they felt that would be best serve the city. And it came up with a Badger meter for our smaller meters. And we put together a really nice, tight spec. And out of that, we received out of that competitive bid process, we got a really good bid, and that's how we got the Badger meter. And so the positive displacement meters was chosen for the 5/8 inch to the 2-inch meters. And then it's a reliable technology, and it's been used for over 100 years. And these Badger meters are 95% accurate up to 1/4 of a GPM. For the larger meters, we selected an ultrasonic meter, and these are where we use for our 2-inch and up. And it uses ultrasound to calculate the volumetric flow, and it's very capable of registering much lower flows than the larger, traditional larger meters. And for the water loss auditing, I'll turn it over to Ms. Lancy.
Thank you, Kathy. Good morning. So water loss auditing is something that the city has been accounting for. We've been doing that as part of the California Urban Water Conservation Council's annual best management practices reporting. So this is something we started doing back all the way in fiscal year 11. And part of this, it's a software where you input various components of what your water loss would be. And one of those specific components is meter inaccuracy. And I'll note that there is now a new State Assembly Bill 555 that is now requiring all water agencies to start performing these water audits and using this software. So the city is well ahead of the curve on this particular legislation. We've already been working on it quite a bit, so we've already been compiling data and trying to hone in on our water losses and reduce them. So for part of our meter program management, we have been bench testing meters. That's a photo of our bench testing equipment. We've done 15% of the old meters that have been pulled. We've been doing this to show that there have been some meter inaccuracies and to help with the estimates of meter inaccuracies. And the way the machine works is that it measures the volume of water at a low, medium, and high flow, and then it compares that to the actual amount of flow that was registered on the meter. And I'll also point out there is a recirculation tank, so we aren't using water with this process. The water gets put back into the system as we are testing these meters. So here's a graph that shows you how our meter inaccuracy estimates have progressed since the inception of the program. The FY14 numbers are basically about 3 months after we first started the program. So the figures are what you would expect with having more robust data set from the bench testing and also by putting more accurate meters in the system. And from the bench testing that we have done, the results do support that we are tightening in on our meter inaccuracies, that these meters are capable of better registering flows and that we are better accounting for the water that is actually being sold to our customers. And I'll also add that these are figures that have been reported as part of our water loss auditing. So this is just a map of all the meters that have been pulled to be tested, and we just wanted to show you that they have been completely random. They come from all over the city. They come from a wide variety of conditions, so it really is a nice snapshot. They're varying ages, varying flow rates, varying sizes, and obviously spatially all throughout our service area. So it's a nice data set that we've been able to put together at this time. So as far as our next steps, we're obviously going to continue the meter replacement program. We're also going to focus on our 1.5-inch and 2-inch meters. As you saw earlier in the presentation, we've already made some progress on them. But with our bench test data, it does indicate that it would be a good investment of resources to also try to do a bit more on these 1.5- and 2-inch meters. They are more challenging to replace. They require a skill set that's a little bit more advanced and some different types of tools. Sometimes the bolts that hold on the meters are very rusted in there, and you need a torch to help get those off. So you obviously don't want an inexperienced operator using that kind of equipment. And they typically are for businesses, and we try to work very closely with our businesses and try to schedule around their needs. So sometimes we might have to come in early in the morning or things like that in order to replace these meters. So it's a bit more of a coordination in order to do it, but we feel like from what we've seen that it makes sense to try to tackle some more of these. We're also working on our upgrade of our work order management system, and as part of that, we've written into the scope that we're going to do an integration with our service orders from our billing system. So how that works is that our meter readers will go out and they'll notice different meter maintenance issues. It could be that the meter needs to be replaced. It could be a meter lid needs to be replaced. The box needs to be replaced. And those generate service orders from our billing system, and we're going to integrate that with our overall water distribution maintenance work order system so that those two systems are talking to each other and we can better track that workflow and those roll-up costs. Long term, with the bench testing data, we want to determine what the real true useful life is of these meters, not base it solely on flow or age, and smooth that long-term replacement so that in another 15, 20 years, we don't just have another 5 years that's a concentrated replacement. We're putting together a report right now of what are our lessons learned from all the bench testing data that we have amassed. And once we get all of that data together, we're going to see what sort of questions do we now still have. And then we're going to pivot our bench testing program to try to address some of those remaining questions that we have. And also to continue to increase our accuracy on our meter inaccuracy estimates. And pursue AMI. I believe Kathy had come to Water Commission several years ago about a business case, and we had done that. But with the drought, our resources really need to be focused on that. But in the future, the meter that you have, you can see it does have a pigtail on it. So with all these meters replaced, should we choose to move to a AMI system, it would be a much easier implementation because basically you just have to connect that device to the meters that are already installed. And physically putting the meters in is really the biggest, most time-consuming part of that. So, obviously the objectives would be to improve our data, to improve customer service with things like possible leak alerts and enhance our leak detection, both on the customer side and depending on what kind of technology is available at the time, possibly even on our own system side as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
On that last question on the AMI, it's always been interesting to me. When I look at that pigtail, it looks pretty flimsy. Tell me a little bit more about how that would work, because I know from the commission standpoint, we're very interested in moving in that direction in the future.
Well, it's actually called a NICOR connector, and what's nice about it is that it's sort of universal. So at the time when we did the spec, that type of connector could work with any kind of a vendor that was out there at that time. They are potted in the factory, and so they are created so that if the meter gets wet, is submerged for a period of time, it's still not going to impact the meter functionality. But they aren't perfect. I mean, gophers can chew through the wires, and we probably will have to do some maintenance things of some of these wires that might need to be replaced before we would go to some sort of system. But it definitely was the best choice at the time that we did the bid spec for us.
So what's the component that fits in there? It all fits within the box?
The component that attaches to that?
Yeah.
It's just a transmitter type device, and it varies by manufacturer.
Okay.
As I say, yes, it's typically mounted in the lid. So when we go through, they'll be replacing the lids. That's where the antenna typically is embedded.
That helps me visualize it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Got one.
So the drought is not over. We know that. But we're not in as severe of a drought as we have been the last 5 years. And obviously we've been talking about AMI for a long time. What's the timeline, or what's the decision-making process or event timeline that gets us to AMI? When do we start that conversation again?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Burney, it's a great question. As you may recall, when we looked at AMI, it's about a $7 to $8 million expenditure to go down that path. And I think what we're continuing to do is kind of struggle with rates and rate fatigue. And, what we're proposing and we'll be talking about in our next session is exactly what kind of revenue we should be going after. And right now it does not include any money to go after AMI. And I'm a firm believer that there's going to be money coming out of Prop 1 to help us with the AMI transition. And so we want to be poised to go down that path when that money starts to become available. But I think we're going to have to level that with the rate fatigue that I think is out there and take a look at it. It'll depend in many ways how quickly water returns, water usage comes back. And so there are many factors that I think we need to continue to talk about it. And my goal with this particular update is to continue to do this update at least annually, if not earlier, as a way to keep this topic in front of the Water Commission and in front of the public. Because I think we want to be talking about when is the appropriate time to start trying to work that into our rates, because this is the future, and I think our customer service here would really improve with this. I mean, I can't get over some of the time that Teresa spends chasing down these people who have unusual water usage and they can't explain it. They don't know how it happened. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how it occurred and or whether there's any grounds for giving relief. and it's a time-consuming effort. And with AMI, we'd be able to see exactly, oh, it happened on this day, and this is what occurred. So it'd be a lot you cut down a lot of the staff time.
Mr. Chair, one other question. By the way, I like your picture. That's a great shot to end on. I think I read an Ed Hat or someplace else. What's the benefit of public feedback? Because when you put in the new meters, you talked about that it had undercounted previously, so people have a bump in their usage in their bills.
You know, in general, for how many meters we've put in, it has been actually really positive in the sense that there haven't been a lot of people that have gotten really up in arms about it. And there are some people that say, no, this new meter can't possibly be right. I never used this amount of water before. And so we try to work with them, educate customers. We do have a limited amount of devices that they don't transmit any data, but they do basically record the reading every 15 minutes or every hour, depending on how it's set up. So we'll do that with the customer, and then we'll, say, okay, when did you use water, and try to show them how the different intervals of time coincide with their water use. And that has proven to be a great tool to educating consumers.
I had one question. There was a slide that showed the water, the bar graph or whatever it was. I wasn't really sure what exactly that was depicting, but just a comment. Is
The
that water
meter inaccuracy one?
Yeah, was that water lost or?
Oh, okay. So that is basically an overall volume, a percentage of the overall volume of the water that we produce that we have estimated is due to meter inaccuracies. Now, when in FY14, we had a very, very limited amount of pilot testing bench data that we utilized to determine these figures. Now, with the figure that we have for this year, we are basically looking at, okay, these are the average accuracy of results by meter size for the different types of meters that had been in our system. And then we ran an analysis to say, okay, assuming that the other meters that are still in the system had similar characteristics, that what sort of amount of unregistered use are they experiencing? And it's not the most perfect method, but it's definitely much more robust and able to really hone in. And so some of them might be under-registering even more, some might be under-registering less, but it's overall, especially with the amount of data that we have, I think a statistically significant amount that is much more robust than when we first started looking at this.
Oh, okay, super.
And this factor has actually been helps to explain why we are continuing to meet our conservation goals, yet our revenues have been also meeting our previous goals, which we thought we were going to fall behind. And there's been kind of this mystery of why, and it's because this would have been water normally checked up as water loss in the system, and we're now, which wasn't lost, it was actually going through meters, we're now accounting for it. And so this program, we're spending about $500,000 a year on replacing meters, and we're seeing a good return from this replacement for sure.
Okay. Super. All right. Looks like we don't have any action on this, just a presentation for us today, right? So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay. We'll move on to item number 6D, policy discussion on water rate development and customer classes. Malcolm Hamilton.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Malcolm Hamilton. I work as an administrative analyst in the Water Resources Division. For many years, I worked in the Transportation Division doing budget analysis and financial planning for them, and some with the Parking Division. And I've recently switched over, and I'll be working on as the lead for the water rate study next year and the year going forward. I did want to make a note, you didn't receive the report in your packet. It was undergoing additional review. Although this presentation, for the substantial portions of that report, it closely matches. So today we'll be going over two things. One, I'd like to give an update on water rate development. We'll talk about the consultant, our schedule for adoption, and then also looking at some of our financial planning and fund reserve situation. Then we'd like to switch gears and talk about the policy direction we'll be requesting from council on our customer classes. Last year, we suspended an out-of-city cost increment that was being charged to our out-of-city customer class to give staff more time to analyze it and look how to apply it in the rate structure. We talked with our rate consultants, and we have a few different approaches, and we'll let you know which one staff would recommend. So on November 8th, we contracted with Bartle Wells Associates. They're based out of Berkeley, California. They specialize in utility rate studies, special project financing, and overall financial planning aspects for municipalities. One thing that's been really great about them is they've been highly responsive and available to us. The water supply situation's been changing sometimes overnight, as well as our timeline for adoption. They've been able to be flexible and help us with that. They'll also be working off the assumption that was delivered on March 21st to City Council, the 3-year water supply outlook. So let's take a look at the water adoption schedule. I think one thing we wanted to do this year was not message twice, message once, and be confident in what we're putting out to the public. So here in April, we're here today. We'll go this coming Tuesday, April 25th, to City Council, and we'll be giving updates on our financial planning, also requesting the direction on customer classes. In May and June, we'll be coming back with proposed rates and requesting authorization to mail the Prop 218 notice. We'll have a noticing period. In August, we'll adopt. We're shooting for early August for a hearing and adoption. And then in September, at some point, the new rates will begin to appear on bills. So we have asked Bartle Wells to develop rates for fiscal years 2018, 2019, and 2020. Now, there's a few reasons why we've done this, one of which is that the rate study can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. And while we do have a consultant working on it, it requires substantial staff time as well to complete them. So if we can do it once for 3 years, we may be able to direct staff time to other efforts. Secondly, we'd like to introduce some rate stability and give some expectations to the communities for what they can expect to be coming. And third, we've gotten feedback from outside financial agencies like a bond rating agency that it gives them more confidence in our financial planning when we have rates adopted in an outlook for 3 to 5 years. So if you're doing year-to-year rate adoption, there is some risk involved with that they see. We will also be asking them to assume continued drought conditions, 30% conservation through FY19. And before I get to these next points, I'd just like to point out that Bartle Wells is working on their own analysis. It's a very deep dive into the rate structure. But city staff has done our own financial planning. It's very preliminary, but it's higher level revenues, expenses, debt service, and capital needs. And what kind of revenue would we need to maintain these debt coverage compliance and stabilize our reserves? What we're looking at here and what we're tentatively planning for in FY18 is an 8% increase in revenue. That's what we need in revenue. And to be clear, a revenue increase is not a rate increase, so we don't want to confuse those two things. And the 8% increase reflects what we think we'll need above FY17. So an 8% increase from FY17 going into 18. That increase is geared towards meeting our debt coverage compliance. We have obligations, and we are required to maintain a certain level of net positive cash flow. In addition, the 8% doesn't completely cover all of our expenses. We'll be using some of our reserves in that 8% increase. And then in FY19 and 20, we're planning for 6% increases in revenue need. And those are less geared towards maintaining debt coverage compliance and more geared towards just stabilizing our reserves. So now we can switch and we'll talk about the customer classes and what policy direction we'll be expecting. First, though, I think it begs the question for everyone, which is when was it first enacted and why? So we went back and we did some research and we found a few source documents for us that gave us a little insight into what had happened in the past. 1973, 95, and 2013 rate study reports. And the 1973 report had an interesting tidbit that the out-of-city rate differential was enacted in around 1920 with the completion of the Gibraltar Dam. At the time, Gibraltar Dam was financed through city property taxes, but only on in-city customers. And so the portion that was allocated or should be allocated to out-of-city customers was put into a rate differential, and so they paid some premium above what in-city customers paid. Additionally, the user's utility tax, which appears on all in-city customer bills, that had previously been returned to the water fund. And so the in-city customers were paying that, but our out-of-city customers weren't, and that also supported a piece of that rate differential. But that's no longer true. The user's utility tax at this point goes to our street fund, and so that's also become a reason that's obsolete. Always, and what's been a theme throughout these rate studies, is the costs associated with the additional infrastructure to serve out-of-city customers. So there's more use of the pump station, miles of pipeline, and generally use of the reserves per customer. Oh, reservoirs, excuse me. That's changed a little bit. With Prop 218, that has become more of the focus of the justification for the cost of service analysis. So the increment in years past had been as high as 2 times or 1.6 times what the in-city rates were. But most recently in the 2013 rate study, the cost increment was determined to be 1.3 times the applicable in-city rate. And as I mentioned, Proposition 218, the big thing for us is that rates must be proportional to the cost of service for each customer class. And it recognizes that the customer classes have a similar characteristic on the whole, or the majority of those in the class share that characteristic. There are also some procedural requirements. We have a 45-day noticing requirement. It's another reason why sometimes it was difficult to meet the July 1st deadline for us, is that would have backed us up to proposing rates sometime in March, which is when we were still figuring out our water supply planning. So looking at Prop 218 and what council authority is, the California Constitution grants council the authority to create customer classes. It also does not obligate city council to have different customer classes. So you combine those 2 points and you get wide latitude to draw lines or determine customer classes through their policy. And that's what we'll be asking for, is council policy on how they'd like to determine this customer class, the out-of-city and in-city customers. And when they've given us their policy and determined the customer class, we will perform the Prop 218 cost of service analysis with Bartle Wells and develop rates. So as we were talking with our rate consultants, we came up with 3 approaches to defining these customer classes. All of these, of course, would require that we do a Prop 218 cost of service analysis. And these are the 3 approaches. Like there was before, we could reinstate a cost increment for out-of-city customers. Now, whether the characteristics of that class are the required use of pumping station or reservoirs, we had talked about another class, pumped versus non-pumped areas in the city, that share similar characteristics and to our out-of-city customer class as it stands. And third, which would be staff's recommendation, is the service area average, which is essentially doing away with the out-of-city class and treating all our customers the same. No matter where you reside in the city, you would have the same rate.
If I may just add something, my name's Kelly Dyer, Water Supply Manager. What's interesting after hearing about the history of the inside city versus outside city, the remaining issue for the cost differential is related to infrastructure. Yet when we were looking at this, and I think you'll see on the following maps, if that was the only reason, we may have drawn the lines a little differently. So that's how this pumped versus non-pumped approach came about, because there are actually some areas within the city that have these characteristics of additional pumping or infrastructure that's required.
And kind of to define what that pumped versus not pumped for the layman's, the majority of our water comes from the Cater water treatment plant. That it serves all or treats all of our surface water, and so this distinguishment that we're going to go through is basically any water that has to be pumped after being treated at the Cater water treatment plant will be in one category, and any customer that can receive water via gravity from the Cater Water Treatment Plant would be in this other customer class, because there's a whole, seems to be a pretty there's a distinction there in elevation, and typically that there is a chance that you can kind of put kind of define that as a customer class if you so choose.
Could I ask a really general question? When did the water and wastewater, when did they become enterprise funds? Do we know? Because again, in your presentation, you talked about early on, people paid property taxes, but the people outside didn't. And property taxes were generally spread and probably included into the water fund at that time. But at some point, you became enterprise fund, so no more property taxes go to the water. So you did make it, there was a division which was made at that time. I'm just curious if.
That's a great question. Maybe some of the history we can look up there.
Okay, so now we'll take a look at the maps of these different customer class areas. What I'd said, approach one would be to reinstate the out-of-city cost increment. What you're seeing on this map in blue is the service area that's within the city limits. And the yellow portions are service areas that are outside of the city, a large chunk of which, and oftentimes generally just referred to as the out-of-city class, is the Mission Canyon area. And then we have some other pieces on the east side in the hills, and then just a couple dots on the west side of town there. The cost increment that we'd reinstate would be similar, but most likely not identical to what it was previously. So previously it was 1.3 times your in-city rate, or your applicable in-city rate. We aren't sure that would actually be the cost increment going forward. Approach 2, as Mr. Hagmark had just described, is a pumped and non-pumped zone. So there's a red star on the map up there, and that is the location of the Cater treatment plant. The blue portions of this map would be all the customers that receive gravity-fed water from the Cater treatment plant, and the yellow portions would be water that leaves the Cater treatment plant and is later pumped to that service area. So a lot in the hills includes the out-of-city class as it stands now in the Mission Canyon area, and then also again on the mesa you see there up a little bit by City College, there's a yellow portion, and then just a brief touch into Hope Ranch. At this time, we don't have estimates to the impact for monthly bills or what the rates would look like. It's just been talked about recently. We think it'd take about a year to come back with a full-fledged study and some recommendations for rates.
One of the reasons that this was not something we were recommending is I think you all agree that our water rates are already extremely complicated, and as this could be drawn as a distinction in some level of service, it certainly would add another level of complexity to our rates, not only communicating to our customers but also our billing system, because in this same situation, you literally could have properties that are right across the street from each other that happen to be in different pressure zones. So although this on the surface may look like a good approach, a compromise, it is fraught with similar complications, and maybe even more so than the current distinctions that we have.
Okay, we'll move on to approach 3. This is staff's recommendation going forward, which is, and I apologize, this map probably should all be blue, because the entirety of the service area would be one class. Whether you are up in the Mission Canyon area with single-family residents or down by the waterfront, you would be paying the same rate. The cost of service would be allocated over the entire service area, so whatever the differential is at this point, and in the next slide I'll show you, would be spread out between all customers.
This slide. Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the white in the lower left? That's sort of, but I mean, does it not get water, or does it get Goleta Water District water? It's a Goleta Water District?
Correct, Councilmember White. That is, we have overlap areas that are actually Goleta Water District customers in their little islands within our service area.
Okay, thanks.
I got a question about annexation. Do those outside the city areas have to be annexed into the? No, it's just city or not city. Okay.
Okay, so This background on cost and customer base really focuses on these two different approaches, one being the out-of-city cost increment and the other being what we're recommending, the service area average. The FY17 rate revenue of approximately $44 million, just to put everything in perspective. The cost of service or additional cost for infrastructure for out-of-city customers is estimated at $500,000. So when we're talking about the service area average, we're talking about spreading $500,000 over 27,000 total customers. So I'll flip to an example of the rates, but this is why you'll see maybe a more significant bump for our out-of-city customers.
Just wanted to note, too, that as you can imagine, when our budget, 10, 15 years ago was $30 million, and the assets, the differential was $500,000. It was a much more significant component of our overall revenue, and I think that's also needs to be taken into consideration that the differential in comparison to our total revenue has drastically changed as well.
Okay, and we'll quickly take a look at the estimated impacts to a single-family residence monthly bill. If you're using 800 cubic feet in a month with a 5/8 inch meter, this is what the impacts would look like. On the top, you have our cost increment category or a service area average. And then on the left-hand side column there, you have a city customer and out-of-city customer. And really what we're showing is that you take the 500,000, you spread it across 27,000 accounts, and it has a small impact on the customer bill of about $1. If you reinstate the cost increment for out-of-city customers, the in-city customers would be paying about $1 less per month in this example, and the out-of-city customers would be paying about $18 more a month. And so our next steps, of course, are to incorporate comments and recommendations from today into our council presentation. We'll be going to council on Tuesday, April 25th for policy direction on customer classes, on how they'd like us to proceed, and give direction to our rate consultants on developing rates. And after we give that direction, Bartle Wells Associates will they'll do the cost of service analysis and the Prop 218 compliance. And then sometime in May or June, we'll come back and introduce the proposed rates.
If I may, I just wanted to mention also with regard to the various options, there is flexibility in what you see across different water agencies as different practices and different types of rate structures. We've looked at what other agencies do, and I just want there to be an awareness that our system is one of the most complicated. We have a D5 distribution system, which is the highest level of complexity, and we have a very diverse water supply mix, which adds another layer of complexity. So looking at other agencies like the City of San Diego, which also has a lot of complexities in their system, they've taken an approach to simplify their water rates and do the averaging approach rather than trying to get into tracing molecules and doing a neighborhood by neighborhood type of approach.
I guess I'm confused. By Prop 218, rates have to be based on the costs. And it's very clear that there's a certain cost associated with out-of-city customers. That's what you just said, $500,000. So I don't understand how under Prop 218 we could pass that on to our other customers.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Burney, the council has granted the authority to create the customer classes. So the customer class could be one instead of having it right now as it's bifurcated into an out-of-city customer class. So by getting rid of the customer class, which is a completely legitimate way of doing it, then we're basing the cost of service on that entire class. Very similar to how we do ag and or single family. We've created those customer classes. That is the legal authority of the council to do, but you could just say you have one big customer class, and in that case we would create a cost of service for that one larger customer class. So that's how this delicate interaction works, and why why we were even able to have this policy discussion on whether or not what direction we want to go in with this.
I had the same reaction. It's like, if you actually have an incremental cost, why should the people within the city pay for that incremental cost? I had that same gut reaction in that regard. And again, it seems to me that yes, you want to get away from the fact of the previous reasons why, but if in fact you're looking at least the basis for 218 and you have these people that are not within the city itself and they want our water service, why should they pay at least a proportional fee for that increment?
So certainly there's an argument for it, and I think the challenge is right now those lines are drawn based on out of city customers versus in city. Is that a good line to distinguish what you're talking about, which is this cost differential, or should it be based on something else? And I think that the other extreme is maybe basing it on whether we have to pump water to those customers or not, which is, there's a lot of similarities between the out-of-city customers and the Riviera and or other parts. You go up on Las Canoas up near Schofield Park, there's some in-city customers up there which look a lot like the out-of-city customers.
I got that, but you're still essentially saying that in-city customers, people that are city residents paying full city taxes, voting in city elections, are going to subsidize the people who get water service outside the city. It is still a subsidy to those people outside the city. Maybe small, but it's still a subsidy.
Comment?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney. If I could just make a couple of comments. I think that that slide with the cost on it is kind of confusing. And when we were reviewing these slides, I didn't realize that slide was going to come in, because that's not really the issue here. The issue here is that fundamentally that we have to meet the Proposition 218 cost of service requirements, and we have to meet the proportionality test, and that all of the customers, they cannot be required to pay more than the proportional cost on their parcel. So it's really, the test is not what the class is required to pay proportionally, but what the parcel is required to pay proportionally. So first we take the cost of service analysis, and we allocate the revenue requirements across the entire system. And then after we've done that, we decide, okay, how do we want to establish classes of customers? And it's within the council's discretion to decide, do we want to have residential customer classes? Do we want to have multiple family residential customer classes? And you're right, one class can't subsidize another class. And traditionally, historically, the city has decided, based upon these increased infrastructure costs and other reasons, that we've created almost a subclass of residential customers residing further away, because it's cost more in infrastructure to service these parcels. But there's also, as Ms. Dyer points out, there's also areas within the city that have these same increased infrastructure costs. So we can't say that those infrastructure costs are just limited to outside the city. So that's the problem that we've gotten into, and why there isn't just a clear differential line. And so that's why we really want to spread these costs out more across the entire class, the class of residential customers. So, that's why staff is looking at an average cost across the entire class of residential customers.
Mr. Chair. So if I hear you correctly, what you're telling me, I think what I heard, correct me that I'm wrong, that you can't create a class, a geographic class, outside the city, inside the city.
No, you could do that. You could create it based upon infrastructure reasons. You
No,
could
no,
create-
I said geographic.
Okay.
Okay, because I understand the
Okay,
infrastructure.
geographic.
Because you could do infrastructure or non-infrastructure. If you
Right.
make those choices, then if you do infrastructure, then you'd have to put pumping out of city, right? The whole 9 yards, if you were gonna do it on that, and do all the calculations, it gets very complicated. Versus geographic, and geographic, yes, in this particular case, has infrastructure costs, so what would be shared or be spread for those customers would be only the infrastructure that they add, the incremental infrastructure.
They're all city customers.
But what I kind of heard you say, and I wanted to probe it, was,
Okay.
right, you really can't do it on that basis unless you do infrastructure or non-infrastructure.
There has to be a cost of service basis. So geographically,
Or any-
they're all
yeah.
city customers. So it's either infrastructure
You're-
additional costs.
So my kind of sub-question there was, how do you define class in the law of 218? Is it by use? Again, it gets into this whole question of
Okay, that's
how do you
tiers.
define?
That is tier use. We have 7 different water sources. Within those water sources, we allocate the sources of water to the high. We're permitted to allocate the different cost of water, different sources of water based upon their costs to different tiers of users. So that's how we do it. Within the classes, we have different tiers. We allocate the sources based upon their cost to the different tiers.
Yeah.
But
But your main point, if I heard it correctly, was you didn't think that in fact under 218 you really could differentiate the out-of-city customers as a class.
no, that's not what I said.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to understand.
What I said is that merely because they're out-of-city customers is not an appropriate reason to differentiate them as a class.
But the city,
Correct.
but the council could say those particular out-of-city customers need to pick up their incremental infrastructure costs.
They could, if there are additional infrastructure costs because of their location.
But the
and-
council could say, we want the infrastructure costs for those white areas,
Right.
but within the city limits, we're going to average.
Then we're creating a separate customer class for those out-of-city customers because of those increased infrastructure costs, correct?
Yeah.
Or we could say, we could do it based upon topographic or elevation
Right, right.
differences, which would be
I
the
got that.
pumping differential. Or we could say, we're all residential city customers, so we're going to average it across the customer class of all customers, residential customers.
Yeah, I just go back to my history as a city planner, that the city not wanting to have out-of-city services subsidized by city residents across the board. I mean, in this case, we're talking water, but across the
Right.
board. And a lot of areas did not want to annex to the city because they didn't want to pay the utility users tax, but in fact, they were going to pay at least their incremental cost outside the city.
Yeah, well, clearly you're right. We cannot subsidize. One customer class can't subsidize another customer class. One parcel can't subsidize another.
But city residents
parcel.
would be subsidizing the infrastructure costs outside the
But
city
there
when
are
you spread it.
city,
No, I understand that. We
so
understood that
that's
one.
what we need to, when we undertake the deeper dive analysis and the cost of service analysis, you determine, we have to proportionally spread those costs.
Good, thank you.
So you actually spent more time on that than you did on the rate increases. When you go back, the 8%, then the 6%, the 8% is just the 1 year, and then you'd do 6% and 6% in 1920. So you'd look up by the end of that time, and your user rates for water would be at least 20% higher than they are now.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jordan, assuming we stay in drought conditions, yes. We were to get some reprieve from drought conditions and pull back on some of our conservation measures. The increased usage could address some of the revenue that we're projected here. Also in here is we have about $3.5 million each year for drought-related expenses, purchasing water, repaying some of that debt that we have related to water debt that we have. So again, if we don't need that, that money comes back into it and would allow us to reduce, which we do not need to renotice if we reduce our rates. Say, for example, things end up being much more positive this next year than we had thought. We could be in a situation where, yes, we have noticed for a 6% increase next year, but we don't need to do it because we had savings from all these different, didn't have to buy any water, whatever it is.
So I would assume that those discussion points, plus some data on supply outlook and choices is going to be much more part of your presentation on Tuesday?
No, what we wanted to do here with this is just touch base with you because the rate consultant is working on the rates now. And we do know this is the information that we've currently given them, and they're running with this information right now. And we wanted to just check in with you all on this. But when we get the rates back, there'll be a much more developed discussion about how those rates feed into how this revenue feeds into our actual rates.
What's the specific recommendation you're looking for?
At this point, any comments that you want us to take into consideration and pass
Actually
along?
it says a recommendation on the report. So I guess, I'll just cut to my frustration. And that's when I'm quiet 1 month, I find out I get frustrated again the next month. And that's that generally putting something like this without a staff report or without a copy of an agenda report at a Water Commission meeting for comments or recommendation, as it says on the agenda, is really just a reporting out on your part. The council agenda report's already been in works for 3 weeks. We walked in here today with nothing in front of us other than what's up here, and it's asking for a recommendation, and it's very, very similar to the situation last month talking about the lawn watering ban, where the council general report and your recommendation to council was already done, but you received an adverse recommendation from us on that. And in a 15 or 20-minute presentation, it becomes a 5-second soundbite that, oh, by the way, the Water Commission had a different viewpoint on that. And luckily, a couple council members perked right up and asked about that. But when stuff's already in the works like this, and I think it's a 3-week process on agenda reports going up and down the chain of approval, and you're here on a Thursday before a Tuesday, it's really frustrating to say that you want recommendations or discussion when it's already cooked. And this is a great example of I'm unclear what you're asking for a recommendation. I'm unclear on the discussion on water rates and increases and how it relates to supply outlook and reserves and what that means to residents. And there was nothing here really presented about that. And most of the conversation seems to be more about a political issue of in and out of city classes and who's griping the most about paying a little higher on their water bill. So my 2 cents, and that's a 2-meeting frustration now, and the answer is to me either to get back in front of these things so they come to the commission a month before, or push it back out to council a month later. That would be the choice.
I share your challenge. I share your feedback on that. I hear your concerns on that. And what we're struggling to do is bring timely information forward, and then also stay in step with the council on these issues. And I think I would actually love to have a follow-up discussion about how we might improve this. But what we're trying to do is certainly get rates adopted in a timely fashion. And getting meaningful feedback during that process is difficult. And that's what we wanted to do here, was at least introduce. I didn't want it to go until June and the next thing you hear from me is here's the rates. And so wanting to bring back something. The staff report, unfortunately, you're right, has been in the works, but was not in a condition that was acceptable to be released as of last Thursday. And so unfortunately that was not in your packet, but that is, we will continue to try and get those in the packet by the time they go out. And that's
Just a question on that one. If it doesn't come out in the packet, could it come out on Monday or Tuesday online and you could point us and the public to it? Is there I mean, I understand that you guys have a lot going on, but is there some way we could still get that information? It doesn't have to be hard copy. I do most of mine online anyway, and it would still be publicly available. Is there some in between we could do so that we could get more information ahead of time?
That's a great question. I don't know, Sarah, do you know the answer to that? Is that something we can share?
Sarah Connect. Well, I apologize for this one in particular because I think that the reason you didn't get it is because our office spent a lot of time working on this one particularly. And that's because, as you may or may not know, we've been in litigation on our water rates for some time now. So this issue is of particular sensitivity and importance. We have to get it right. So that's why this report didn't come to you, because we've been working on it for a long time. I did check to see if I could get this report to be able to hand out to you today, and I tried to get it. But the only copy I could find was still in red line, so I wasn't able to print it out. So I apologize personally for that. But
Yeah.
I want to, first of all, say that Mr. Jordan made a comment about the lawn watering that came out of this commission, that it was not a 5-second. It may not have taken long at council, but I can tell you that it was something that was a big deal there as well, and that the commission's position was not just blown off. And I also share your frustration. I mean, having sat in your guys' chairs, I appreciate the comments about the process of having staff reports come through and material come through, and I really appreciate Ms. Connect just kind of stepping up and saying, that something stopped in our legal office for a longer period of time, because we all appreciate the work that just what we've done this morning already, or what you have done this morning already, is just a great big blob of money and decision making and responsibility that is baked into our system. And this rate business, Mr. Davis has drilled down on it some, is obviously a touchy area. It's really a touchy area, and it's been, I mean, some of it goes back, and your history question about when did this become an enterprise fund. There was a time when Mission Canyon refused to become part of the city because they would have had to pay more property taxes. Then came along Proposition 13 and wiped that out. But that's one of the reasons why, as an example of a history, that how do you untangle that today? I want to just make these comments because I've been in your place of going, damn it, nobody's listening or whatever. Wrong. This is really critical work you're doing, and a couple of steps get missed in here, for litigation reasons, frustrating. But this area in particular is one that needs to stay on a schedule. As you know, the money needs to start coming in. We lost how many millions of dollars, was it last year, because our rate system got out of sync a little bit, and so it was just we were late in getting that into place. So I share your frustration when things don't come to you timely and we don't get the full process. But it's been so complicated that you have been missed in a step here. But I note it. And I don't want that to happen anymore. So at least there's one council member up there that's looking out to make sure that full digestion occurs, full processing occurs here. And thank you for your work again.
Okay, so on this item that is going to council next week, are they gonna have a recommendation on this, or are they? What is it, or is it just a presentation to them?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, what we were looking for next week from council is some direction to go on this out-of-city customers. We were looking to so that we can turn around and give our rate consultants something to start working on and bring back something probably in June for a more public discussion about it. And if it takes longer publicly to talk about it, that's fine. And if we need to carry forth several options, we can do that. It just comes at a cost. We would, as far as the rate development, this is kind of the information that we've given to the rate consultant. I guess any feedback or comments on that we want to share with the council and make sure they're aware of any concerns that you have. Again, these are just some of the fundamentals that are going into the current rates that we're developing. Once we get to that point, there will be a public discussion and, again, more input on that. And if there are changes that need to be made to the rates, we will certainly stop and make those changes. So that's kind of where we're at today.
Well, Mr. Chair, based on the information we have or lack of, and I appreciate Mr. Jordan's comments to a great degree, I actually would like to recommend to council that they consider keeping essentially a class of customers outside the city, that we minimize the cost of city residents, and that any incremental cost be picked up by county residents.
I like that recommendation, and I think obviously we're gonna have to have some more discussion on this. And
Yeah, and again, I think you should pass to council that we did not have adequate time or information to really digest the entire thing, but we're asked our opinion. Our opinion is stated by the motion.
Are the other
There's no second.
commissioners on board with that recommendation?
Is that going to be a
or-
motion?
Yeah, that is the motion.
Okay, then I have just a discussion point. So
Sure.
when you say if you were to carry for more options, it would be higher cost, what kind of higher, so your recommendation is to carry it in as the whole area is one particular area. So that's going to be a cost. So the motion's going to be to do something separate. And so if it was to do both of those, how much more cost is that to move the process forward as it is now, the 1.3, whatever that's called, and then also to do what you're recommending is the whole area becomes one class? I mean, how much cost?
We'd basically have to do two sets of rates, and
I mean, is it
my concern
tens
too
of
would,
thousands of dollars? Is it six figures? Is it?
it's probably tens of thousands of dollars, and then it's also the time of, I'm not sure that we would be able to come back in June, so it would be a delay of rate implementation, which, has hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue loss impacts.
Let me clarify at least what I'm saying, because I'm not saying do two studies.
I know you're
I'm
not.
basically saying if they're asking council for direction, then council would give direction and do one study, and that would be the study.
Which would be not the recommendation that the department brought
Staff
forward.
could do whatever, but again, what we're basically saying, if council
No.
is asked to basically give direction to staff on how to proceed with the study, they would proceed under those premises.
So I kind of like from what I know today, I kind of like the ease of the one, of what you're saying you recommend. It's just done. It's just one rate. Everybody's in the same pool. I appreciate the concerns. I would have those concerns too as a city ratepayer. And so my preference would be that you do two. That you do one that represents the system the way it is now and one that represents the way you're recommending. So if the choice of recommendation coming from here in a motion is just to do one, I won't support that. I would rather see us do two.
So what we did in trying to show a kind of an example of how it impact the inside customers and outside customers, was trying to give a sense of it. So basically it would be rates that would roughly reflect that inside customers, if we're averaging it, would be about $1 a month increase, and then it's about an $18 increase to outside customers. So that's really what the two different rate structures would come back to say, but that's what we're trying to present with this. But we can certainly pass along that input to the council.
Yeah, I think I understood the incremental difference there. But again, going to Mr. Jordan's question, we're also looking at increases for the next 3 years, and then even probably past that.
Mm-hmm.
So every dollar on water rates counts. And in this particular case, we're saying we're going to change the rates, and the county people are going to pay less, and you're going to pay more. And I think that's a consideration the council should look at and give you direction. So I don't have a second to my motion, so it'll die on the floor.
I mean, I would, yeah.
I mean, we can revise the motion to present all these options to council and then have staff share our concerns. But it's up to the commission how we want to proceed with that. I'm kind of on board with how it was presented, but that's just my own personal opinion.
I'm actually, I would second Dave's. I like that the other option is simple, and I realize it's not a lot, but as a policy, and especially going forward, because costs increase, and especially infrastructure costs are always hard to put on. We always struggle with infrastructure costs. So as much as I like the simplicity and appreciate that it's not a huge margin for a city customer, as a policy discussion, I'll second Dave's motion.
And I hear no interest in the pumped versus not pumped approach. Okay.
True. Okay. We have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay. 3-1. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. We will move on to item number 6E. Tom Farum is here to talk about the Lake Cachuma contract renewal. We may have to cut short the drought update. That's fine. Did I mishear you? I thought you were in favor of two. I thought you were in favor of two different.
Doing the studies on two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, not just
Right, that's what we voted on.
that the motion.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners,
No, the motion.
Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, and today what we wanted to do is invite Mr. Fayram to come and speak to us about the contract renewal. That discussion has been heating up, and our contract for Cachuma expires in 2020, and I was very pleased to have Tom agree to come and speak to us. So thank you, Tom.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joshua. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Tom Fayram. I'm Deputy Public Works Director for the County of Santa Barbara. I'm not a water service provider do not get my water service from the city, so although a county resident. Anyway, I was happy to come before you today at the invitation of Joshua to talk about the contract renewal for the Cachuma contract. I'm probably one of the few left people still working that was involved in the last contract renewal, which was back in the early 1990s, and I didn't think I would be around for the next one, but here I am. So we'll go forward. And by the way, that picture, I hope we all aspire to be able to see something like that soon once again. So just a little bit of the project history of Lake Cachuma was authorized by Congress in 1948. Actually, there's some interesting books that you can find that talks about the controversy of the project and how narrowly it was approved. It was ultimately constructed between 1950 and 1956. The County Water Agency, one of its actual purposes for being founded was for entering into contracts for federal projects, Cachuma being one of them, and the Twitchell project, which is actually part of a larger project called the Santa Maria Project up in North County as well. In 1995, the Water Agency also renewed the contract for a term of 25 years, and that term now is coming near in September of 2020. And actually, the contract itself suggests that renewal of that contract should start no less than 2 years prior to the expiration of the contract. In looking at just the process and working with the Bureau of Reclamation and federal processes, we felt that it was probably prudent to even start that process even sooner. So back in July of last year, we went to our Board of Directors, which is also the Board of Supervisors. The Water Agency, by the way, is a dependent special district. Its governing board is the Board of Supervisors. we went back in July to meet with the Bureau of Reclamation and find out what was involved with the contract renewal process, and then we would return to the Water Agency Board and ask for direction if they wanted us to seek a renewal of that contract. I would also note that one of the critical issues in the 1995 renewal, and probably one of the most controversial and involved, was repayment of the capital costs of the project. And those costs were paid off, I believe, in 2015. I hope I got that right. Is that right? The capital costs were paid off in 2015. So moving forward, that's a big element of the contract that will be set aside because there are no more capital costs to pay off. It's interesting to put it in perspective because there's a lot of things going on with the Kachuma project. Obviously, the water supply contract that the Water Agency now holds has what's called member unit subcontracts with the 5 member units that get water from the lake. There's also what's called a managing partner agreement with the County of Santa Barbara. That's not the Water Agency, but the County of Santa Barbara Parks Department, which operates Kachuma Park. And that park is actually a federal park, and it is operated by the county. And then the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board has an O&M contract as well that is scheduled to expire at the same time as the water supply contract. And then the Central Coast Water Authority also has a WARN Act contract for moving non-federal water through the reservoir, that being State Water Project or other purchased water. I would mention the managing partner agreement for the operation of the park. Renewal of that contract was signed by the Board of Supervisors, and I think it was 2012 for a 25-year term. So that contract is on a different timeline than what these other contracts. But the water supply contract, the operations and maintenance contract, and the WARN Act contract are all on similar timelines. And I know that the Kachuma Operations and Maintenance Board Manager and then also the Central Coast Water Authority Executive Director are all aware of these and planning, how they're going to address these timelines as well. So some of the issues that we've been talking with the member unit managers that we hold regular meetings with are about some of the things we want to talk about in the coming contract. One of those, of course, is of interest, I think, to a lot of people is the availability of water and safe yield of the reservoir, and we've seen that those issues have been challenged over the last drought with a combination of an extremely record-breaking drought over a short-term period. We don't know if a 7-year drought is actually going to be the record drought or not, but certainly over the short term, over 5 years, it was far drier than what we had seen before. I think the term of the contract has been somewhat of an issue. I don't know if that issue is even subject to negotiation. My understanding is the Bureau fully intends to do a 25-year contract, and they're not interested in anything else. It's possible that a water year change could happen. Right now, the water year starts in October, and it's kind of an awkward timeline. And I think certainly with the hydrologic cycle, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think I've talked with Joshua and others about maybe a May water year would make a lot more sense. And actually, the October water year really causes some complications with accounting for the water as well, because what could happen, and has happened, is that you could have a spill year, in which case water is available to all the member units, additional water, and that suspends the use of their current water year water, and then you would enter into October with a large carryover balance, and in effect you have a reservoir that is not really full for purposes of yield, because you are now storing water from previous years and not starting with a clean slate. So therefore, starting on May 1st has a lot of opportunities to better try to quantify water availability. There's been discussion over the years about evaporation and the methodology for how it is calculated, I think, on a couple of terms. One is just the physical, the way the Bureau of Reclamation calculates evaporation using an evaporation pan. Are there better methods now available to really accurately? I think we all want to get it right, but they use a kind of a time-tested process of using an evaporation pan, and then through extrapolation, they try to apply the evaporation over a 3,000 acre lake from a pan that's probably, I don't know how big it is, probably about this big. And so, so there's been questions about the accuracy of that. There's also questions about evaporation, accounting of evaporation as the lake gets lower. And we saw that it really starts to cause problems because there are a number of accounts that sit in the lake that are not subject to evaporation pursuant to state law. So when we get down to a lower elevation, the evaporation for the remaining water is basically carries the weight for those items that are not subject to evaporative losses, namely being downstream water rights accounts are not subject to evaporation, and that's pursuant to the water rights orders. So those issues I think need to be looked at. I think the costs moving forward of how what the costs are from the Bureau of Reclamation. Obviously, the capital cost issue is gone. The actual cost of the project may be more on the O&M side and the bills that the Reclamation sends to the Cachuma Operations Maintenance Board, but they are going to have a cost for water, and we don't know what they're intending to charge for that water. I would also mention the grand jury completed a report last summer about this time last year, maybe it was May or June last year. The city, as well as the other member units in the county, all addressed some of the issues about the term and safe yield and those issues. And then there might be other issues that would come up from the member units about how that contract would look. But I think the bottom line, what we got from the Bureau of Reclamation is that unlike the 1994 renewal, there are many aspects of this that are going to be simpler, and we're hopeful that this will be simpler and that we really would have a contract that would move forward and ensure that we have delivery of water from the Cachuma project to the member units. And I think one of the key issues, though, is making sure that water is available through our critical drought period, so we don't have some of the stresses that we had in this last go around. Talked about safe yield. We looked at this is a graph that shows the variability of our rainfall. Actually, at Gibraltar Dam, which we like to use as really the indicator of water supply in the San Ynez River watershed. And over years, we have times of abundant water, and then there's times where we have less abundant water. And if you can see that little red line in there, is our previous drought of record, that our critical drought period, which is the 45 to 52, 1952 period. We don't know if we're redefining that here yet or not. I think it was said earlier, we don't know that we're out of the drought. I certainly don't consider us out of a drought. One dry year does not create a drought. One wet year does not end a drought. And that's my opinion. I don't know if there's a formal definition of when a drought begins or when it ends, but I certainly am wary that we are not out of this drought and would welcome being proved wrong by a wet year next year. Again, and then showing from that rainfall the Cachuma storage over time, we can see back in 1991. Interesting, back in 1991, I remember very vividly the concern at that time, and that we didn't have the State Water Project at that time, and that was it. What we saw in the lake, that was it, aside from whatever member units had in their groundwater basins, which for some member units is more plentiful than for others. And then in our most recent drought, we can see how fast we hit an all-time low of 7%, and then, of course, welcomed by the rains of February that brought us back up to about 50%, a little over 50%. I just point out some of the interactions the Water Agency also has with Cachuma. We do a lot of things related to that. We talked about water availability, and what we've done over time is start. I think the term we use now is slab diagram for this, where we try to account for all the water, because when you look at Cachuma, even right now, and you look at Cachuma at 50%, that is not 50% water that's available for delivery to the member units. There's a fraction of that when you start to account for all the things that would happen. So as a snapshot in time, not knowing what future winters are going to do, it's very important that we understand how much water is there, so that as we allocate water, we don't run ourselves into a problem where we've over-allocated the reservoir. You've counted on water that no longer exists, and that we have problems associated with that. we do many other things too. We do inflow projections. We were doing that throughout the winter. Everybody wanted to know, well, if we got this rain, what's the lake going to come up to? I was a little bit reluctant in sharing that because the model that we use for this is a flood forecasting model and not what I would call a lower inflow model, but it actually did amazingly well. And we were able to forecast pretty close what the reservoir was going to do. This was important for a number of reasons. One, it's really good to know how much you're going to get. We also had a pump barge sitting out there with pilings and all sorts of appurtenances that were critical to the elevation, and so I think that worked out very beneficial to the COMB folks for knowing when to pull all that information out. We've done reservoir volume surveys, most recently completed in 2013. And then also over time, the Water Agency has made payments towards the capital cost of the Kachuma project. When the Twitchell and Kachuma projects were constructed, it was recognized at the time that there was a greater benefit to the county as a whole of having a reliable water supply, which Twitchell and Kachuma help provide. And so all the property owners in the county of Santa Barbara, including those in Cuyama and other distant areas, through their property taxes, contributed a small increment towards both of those projects. And then last, we also operate, as I'm sure you are aware, a cloud seeding program was pretty active this year. We do this in cooperation with many water purveyors, not just Kachuma member units, but also North County water purveyors that contribute to that as well. And again, looking primarily, our target areas are above the Kachuma project and Gibraltar, but then also above the Twitchell project for North County. So those are projects that we operate. And again, we cost share that with the purveyors throughout the county. Now, I know that there's some ongoing issues that are in the works right now and really do stand to take perhaps more time than what the contract renewal process would take. We have a draft order from the State Board that proposes to potentially seriously impact the yield of Kachuma, and I know there's discussions going on with that. At some point, we'll see a draft biological opinion from the National Marine Fisheries in terms of release requirements for steelhead downstream. Again, has a possibility to impact the yield of the reservoir. We believe all those issues are addressable within a new contract because we believe it's very important that periodically we do a new yield study, of which we have done a draft safe yield study, and we're leaving it at a draft until we know more about what the climate issues are. We want a 7-year period to know whether we're in a new critical drought period. And then also, as a part of that yield, you can plug in what the requirements for releases would be, whether it be from the State Board or the National Marine Fisheries. But that's one of the items that I think was the shortcoming of this last go-around is while the environmental document for the contract in 1994 addressed taking subsequent shortages from Kachuma as the reservoir went down, there's nothing in the contract that required that. I think it's important that the contract address that we know how much water is available from the project. And we certainly can all be unhappy with what some of these results are, and I think we all would have concerns about losing the supply from Kachuma. But I think it is really important that we know the answer to that question so that we can make appropriate adjustments on that and not pretend like we have more water than we really do. So the timeline for this, I believe this is my last slide. We would be looking, we'll actually be going to our board of directors on May 5th, which is in about 2 weeks. And if they give us direction to proceed forward, then that would start the process. And then we would be meeting with the Bureau of Reclamation and then also start the subcontract process as well with the member units. And I would, I don't think I had it in here. I wanted to talk about a steering committee that we've arranged. I don't know if he's been here, but we have hired an extra help person to help us with this, who was a member unit manager. Charles Hamilton is working for the Water Agency now to help us with this. He's been working with the member unit managers to assemble a committee that can help us address the issues as we go through this process. And we also want to be transparent and invite not only CCRB but the downstream interests too, and make sure that we're above board on everything that's happening with this contract renewal. And then, of course, we fully intend to have public input as a part of this as well. And I think that that ends. I have my contact if you have some questions that come up after that. I'm sure Joshua can answer them as well, but my email's there as well, and a good-looking picture from earlier this spring. So, I also note that I also have Frey Kreese, who is our water agency manager, here with me as well.
Thanks, Tom. That was a great presentation, and I'm really pleased that you're here today. May 2nd's coming pretty quick, so I do have some questions. I want to focus a little bit more on the process from here, because that's kind of where our concerns might be. How are you going to involve the electeds from the member units in the actual renewal process?
Well, that's a good question in terms of the process. How we envisioned is with the steering committee that would involve all the member unit managers, and I would presume that the direction would come from their boards to those staff. In other words, the last time we did this renewal, we didn't have elected officials from all of the 5 member units engaged in that, but rather the member unit managers, and in that case, heavily the council for those were involved in those discussions as well.
Tom, and I think the last time you did this, correct me if I'm wrong, I was working for the city at the time, didn't you have weighted voting? So again, the city is a larger weight than some of the other members in that regard?
So I don't recall a voting process or not. It's not to say it wasn't there. There was a organization that was developed called the Kachuma Project Authority, and whether or not that particular entity had a weighted vote on these issues, I'm not sure. I think ultimately, when it looks at the issues, I'm hopeful that we can go by consensus. Now, I understand, and I'm not. I don't live in a world to think that this is going to be perfect and everybody's going to agree, because there are differences in all of the member units and in their supplies. For me, I think there really are a couple of principles that I think are important for the region, and I know our board has expressed a desire that many a regional supply like this be operated in a regional manner, which may be more beneficial to one and maybe less beneficial to the other. But it's really hard when it's one straw feeding everybody. You have to come up with a greater good. And really, for me, that anchor is a safe yield to avoid what I thought was a potentially tragic condition that we were facing, reliant on a water supply, the State Water Project. As beneficial as the State Water Project has been in terms of a supplemental supply that we didn't have in 1991, we had a community that was reliant on a mechanical system moving water from hundreds of miles away, and that, I believe, puts our community at risk.
Yeah. I have some more, but go
Okay,
ahead.
before you move on, because I think you guys are going to get more into the details, and for those of us who maybe weren't there last time, how does this decision-making process work? So also, I guess we didn't get any background on this, and none of this seems like it's new. So I'm kind of wondering why I didn't get any history or background in my packet on this. But how does the decision process work? Who's on the steering committee? How does the Board of Supervisors plan? Who's making the contract with the Bureau, and then how do those decisions get made? I guess I'm asking for a little bit more.
Well, maybe we can back up. There's an org chart in there that kind of had the breakdown of.
Right, and I saw that, but does that mean that?
And maybe you could explain that just a little bit more, how that works as
So,
a background.
In the ultimate decision making.
Yeah. Well, I think in this case, as the contract is ultimately approved by the board of the water agency, that's where the ultimate approval would need to be secured from. However, I recognize that there are issues that all of the individual member units would have. I think there's issues. There's member units that probably don't want us to be the contractor. I understand that, and we certainly have to work through that. I also understand that the Bureau of Reclamation intends to renew a contract with us. So I think it really is incumbent on trying to isolate what the issues are and work through those issues cooperatively and finding the best regional solution, which is not going to be the greatest solution for any individual member unit on its face. I'm hoping that all the member units agree that going through what we have just gone through is not what we want to do moving forward. I think that is what our board certainly is interested in. And if there's a disagreement there, then I think it's going to be a decision that our board's going to have to weigh off then as well. I'm hoping that that's where I see one of the biggest conflicts. I'm not sure where other conflicts are going to be because there are only certain things that are within the scope of this contract. For instance, how much water is released for fish is not something this contract can negotiate or address. That will be negotiated through a federal process with the Bureau and National Marine Fisheries. It also is not going to weigh in and address how much water is released for downstream. That is set by the State Water Board. So when you get aside from that and you look at what the issues are, then we have to start looking at, are there individual member units that want to move the term or the water year to May? There might be some that don't. We're going to have to make a choice. Is it a vote among the member units that do that? I think some of those issues are probably, well, what serves best for the most of the purveyors in that case? If it's, I'll just be frank, if it's a move that we want to be able to take water such that in 3 years the lake is back to where it was, I don't think that will work, and there's going to have to be a higher discussion on that. I'm hopeful that isn't the case, but so beyond that, I think we can work through most of these issues. I certainly understand. I think it's the city that actually brought up, how is this evaporation occurring, and is it right?
Right.
And we want to get that right. And so, other than that, I don't know what it is we would be voting on or disagreeing on. But that's not to say they aren't there. I just don't. I try to hit some of the main issues, and I do know some of the issues are that there's probably a preference by some member units not to have the county do the contract. That was the same in 1994. That's why the Kachuma Project Authority was formed. However, the board of directors of the water agency recognized that there are also very significant regional issues with this project, and it's not run like an individual water supply for a member unit. So therefore, it takes a broader view that doesn't subscribe to one interest of a member unit or another. And so that's the challenge that we'll have in moving forward, and it's the challenge that I'm prepared to take.
On that point, is the Kachuma Project Authority that you talked about before, maybe that's what I remember where the weighted voting came up, because I do remember that conflict at that time. I'm curious as to that org chart that you just had. I'm really curious as to how the member agency staffs are involved in the discussions with the Bureau, on an ongoing basis, because whether than being essentially top down, but basically collaborative with the staffs, how we keep the electeds involved at the time, because the regional issues are big, but all those other issues are even bigger in that regard. And so I'm just curious how in this process you keep the city at the table when you're discussing things with the Bureau, because again it just wouldn't work if we're not at the table. I think, at least my recollection is, we pay a large percentage of the cost of the lake in that regard. It's one of the larger providers. But how is this process going to include both our staffs at the table, our electeds involved during that process, and in the end, when there are conflicts, that in fact, there is a recognition of who's paying the freight relative to the project itself?
Yeah, and my hope is with the intent of the steering committee that Mr. Hamilton has reached out. We actually, at the suggestion of a member unit, tried to put together a charter, what we used to use at the county called a project charter, that would talk about the organization. That was challenging because trying to get everybody to agree on that process was difficult, and because everybody has their opinion. But I do want to have all the member unit managers fully intend to have that, would not do it without moving through this process. And then where we cannot come to terms, and I might be naive, but we may be able to have this occur if I think the one irreconcilable issue would be if there is not a desire to be on a safe field professionally, and I think from regionally we would not support that. Now again, I'm just emphasizing because that is so important, and probably the biggest one. And if we agree on that, I'm not sure what other issues we can't overcome. If the member units want to stay on October, then it makes it a little harder to do the accounting, but we can do that. If the member units want to keep evaporation there, certainly negotiation of the cost of the water that reclamation is going to charge, the water agency is not going to be paying that. The water users will be paying that. So that's those 5 member units and their customers, of which I am a customer of the Kachuma project as well. And so we are going to need the input on that, because those issues don't affect some of those really broad regional important issues, and really should be driven by the member unit managers and how that works itself. And then there might be other issues that maybe we have to come back for more discussion and come up with a process for how we resolve that. But maybe I'm on the naive side, but in talking with reclamation, this is going to be a process that is going to extend this contract, and the variable is going to be how much water you get out of the reservoir, and then what you're going to pay for it. And in the past, and in that 94 contract, there was a significant portion of the capital cost that had not been paid off because it was a water supply contract and not a mortgage, whereas the Twitchell project was a mortgage. You paid every year and it was done. This one was based on the amount of water that was used, and in the early years it wasn't using the water that we use today, so there was this huge bill to pay off. And so how that got paid off was one of the big issues that I remember in that.
What happened with the charter idea?
I think with the charter idea, we were not able to secure, I think, a uniform agreement where everybody was willing to say, yeah, we adopt this. There was question, do we need to go back to our council or our board to approve this? So I think we got it into a form where we don't call it a charter, but what did we call it? Maybe it still is a charter. But basically a document that guides us moving forward, and I haven't heard anybody absolutely opposed to it. We tried to, we worked on that a long time, getting comments back and forth, and I understand from 5 member units, one of them being on one side of the mountain, others being on the other, differences in how it all works. That's a tough one, to get. But I think we got it pretty close.
Is that going to go up on the 5th?
Chair and Commissioners, this is a non-signatory document.
Okay.
So this is it will not be shown on the 5th, but there's nothing hidden. Your staff has it, so
okay. Great. Yeah.
We just tried to try to well, I don't know if expose or plan how this was going to work, and how we have the collaboration of all the member unit managers.
Okay, super. Any other comments or questions?
No, but I this is coming to us. It's not going to be in front of the council, unfortunately. Joshua, on Tuesday, do we have our regular report on the drought conditions and water supply?
That's correct.
I actually like to see at least the fact that we had this, and thank you, Tom, for answering the questions, because we do have. I know that at least the commission, and I know in some discussion with council, there is some concern relative to the county as this regional agency exerting a certain amount of control. And straight out. That's in play. So I'd really like to see at least the concerns that I have expressed up to council. I don't know if that comes from the full board. And that is essentially one that our staff basically be involved in the discussions with the Bureau, that the electeds be kept informed in the process, that the process doesn't exclude them to the end and bring them in. And frankly, some recognition of what the city's role is and the weight it plays in the actual operations and cost of Kachuma be included at least in the decision making. Because again, I hate to say it, but you know, if we do have a bigger interest in that regard, I'd like to see that interest reflected in the process. So I'd like to have at least those concerns reflected up to council when it goes for the drought report on Tuesday, if I could.
I might add, Mr. Chair, if I just could on that, a couple of things. As we go through this process, I'd be delighted to come back to this commission and have periodic updates on where we are. And if we have issues, let's put them out and explain what the issues are and where those issues are.
Yeah.
Whether it's an issue that the county takes exception with, an issue that the city or some other district. I would also mention that all of the process of this, the Bureau of Reclamation requires it be open and anybody can attend any of the negotiation sessions that happen. And so even if elected officials wanted to attend those, they could certainly do that. So, but perhaps I can work with Joshua, and this being one of the few venues that is televised and open to the public, it might be an opportunity to have increased public awareness of this process as it goes forward.
I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for the offer, Tom. That's really great.
Yeah, that would be
But
spectacular.
anyway, I could make that as a motion if need be, that those comments be passed on to council on Tuesday.
I'd second that.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Dyer, do you have any comments in this?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Mr. Fairham and Ms. Crease for being here today. And, you know, we're happy to, at this point, the county is the contract holder and would support that as long as there's a fair and collaborative process. And I think there's probably still some questions. It wasn't necessarily clear how staff engages with the Bureau and how the elected officials of the member units are involved. There's a meeting with the County Board of Supervisors on May 2nd, and having the advanced lead time with all the member units before going to the Board of Supervisors. I think that's a good suggestion. So I thank Commissioner Davis for his comments. And again, we are happy, looking forward to a collaborative and fair process going forward.
For some reason, did I say May 5th when I said at the board? Or did I say May 2nd?
You said 2nd.
I said 5th. And when Kelly just said that, I stand corrected. It's May 2nd.
Yeah, right.
May 5th is a Friday. Maybe I'm looking forward to that Friday.
I bet. Tom, we've been through this before, so.
Great, thank you for outlining those points. Yeah, I think the whole commission echoes those same.
I think we need a vote on the motion.
Yeah. So yeah, I have a first and a second to bring this, or just share this with council.
On Tuesday.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No? Okay. Super. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And looking forward to hearing some more updates in the future with you. Okay, we're running long, so let's burn through item number 6F, the Stage 3 drought update. Then we'll close it out with the manager's report.
So
Joshua.
yes, Mr. Chair, we are running a little long here. I'm going to have Ms. Dyer do the presentation today, and we'll move through it quickly and hit the highlights. She will be making this presentation to City Council next week. I will be at a conference, and we'll try and wrap this up in about 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Kilburn, Commissioners. My name's Kelly Dyer, and there won't be a lot that's new in here, so I'm going to probably just breeze through the things that you have seen before and focus on the new parts. So the outline is a brief update on the drought status, our demand status, and our water supply status. Show our water supply strategy, drought funding. I think water rates we've already talked about, so I won't be going into that. And then have a few slides on water conservation. So these are the rain totals for the current water year. This is taken from the County of Santa Barbara's website. And so we've had above normal rainfall at all of our reservoirs. This chart shows the rainfall at Gibraltar. You can see the last 5 years, we had well below average rainfall. And then in our current water year, we've had just above average rainfall. This hatched mark is from that one huge storm that we had on President's Day weekend. So, but for that one storm, we would otherwise still be below average rainfall for the year. This is a chart showing Kachuma storage. So the green is the last major drought, showing the 1986 to 1993 period. And then the black line is our current drought. So we trended pretty closely with Kachuma storage as we did in the last drought. This drought was more severe, so you can see Kachuma storage didn't bounce back. We didn't get relief as quickly as we did in the last drought. That one storm we had in February brought the reservoir up 50 feet in 1 month. So I think we tracked pretty closely to what we did last time. And we had a lot, things have changed since then with our environmental requirements. So I think we did pretty well. The storage is currently about half full, which puts us back to where we were roughly in 2014 when we first declared drought. So we don't know if next year will be dry or wet, but we've rewound the clock in terms of Kachuma storage for a couple of years. This is a U.S. drought monitor. It's put together by the federal government, NOAA, and it pretty much shows that the rest of the state is out of the drought. They actually have too much water. But in our area, we are still in a drought. And something I wanted to make clear, there's actually a note on here that says the drought monitor focuses on broad-scale conditions and local conditions may vary. Well, that's true even within our county. There's North County residents that have larger groundwater basins and are not in as severe drought as we are here on the South Coast. So the South Coast remains, I think every agency still remains in a drought declaration with emergency water use restrictions. Our demand status, it looks like for the month of March, we had a 44% reduction in water use compared with our 2013 water use. That's remarkable. When we were, at that time, most of March we had the lawn ban in place. It was March 21st when we went to council to revise our stage 3 declaration. So I think this continued conservation of 37% running average is reflective of the water use restrictions we had in place. Here's a chart showing our total water production. It's historical, going back to 1980s. This is one of my favorite charts. Here's the water use before the last drought. And then you can see a dramatic reduction in water use in the 1989 to 92 period. After the drought ended, our demands slowly recovered, but they never got back to what they were before. They remained about 20% lower than they were in the 1980s. And then here we are in the current drought, and our water use is pretty much exactly the same now as the low point from the last drought. So I think that's shows the great efforts of our community to take action on their own to reduce their own water use. So our supply status, Gibraltar is currently full, and we've been diverting since March 1st. We are maximizing our use of Gibraltar now while the water quality is good. And one of the challenges we have with Gibraltar is if the water sits too long and over the summer months it starts to degrade. So we're really trying to maximize as much as we can while the water quality is looking really good. And we also have our hydroelectric plant that is now online, so that's pretty exciting. Kachuma is at about 50% of capacity, but not all of that water is project water. That's a pretty complicated accounting system where some of the water is for fish account, some is state water, some is for downstream water rights. So when you take out all the different slices of the pie, what we have for project water allocation this year is a 40% allocation from the Kachuma project. Fish releases resumed with the additional water and storage. And you may recall from last month's discussion, there was a concern that the fish releases were going to be done through the Hilton Creek Emergency Backup System, which uses the outlet works at Bradbury Dam, and it shut down our state water deliveries. So that did occur. Our state water deliveries are now back online. Central Coast Water Authority staff were able to install a bypass around the outlet structure, similar to what we had before. It goes a little bit farther into the lake, but it definitely was a great effort by CCWA to act swiftly and get our state water deliveries back online. Our emergency pumping barge has been dismantled. All water from Kachuma is now gravity flowing. We don't expect that we'll need the pumping barge until August of 2019. So that gives us a couple of years before the current projections would show the lake level dropping low enough to need the barge again. Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board is the agency that installed the facility, and they'll be making a decision this Monday, April 24th, on what to do with it now that it's dismantled and planning for the next phase in case it's needed again in a couple of years. And then finally, just to mention, we have this contract renewal. The Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors meeting is on May 2nd. At that point, county staff will be requesting authorization from the board to submit a formal letter to the Bureau of Reclamation requesting the contract renewal for the Kachuma project. So imported water.
Again, I didn't ask that question to Tom, but I'll ask the question here. When that goes to the board in a second, or they're just asking to begin the contract renewal, or are they actually at that particular point setting up that process and that structure? Do you know?
Chair Kilborn, Commissioner Davis, what they're doing, there's a clause in the current contract that says that if you intend to renew the contract, you need to submit a formal letter 2 years prior to the contract expiration date. So the contract expires in 2020. So that is, it's somewhat of a formality.
Just a letter asking to begin the renewal. Okay, great.
Correct.
Good, thank you.
Let's see. The state water allocation has increased from 60% to 85%, so that was good news. And as I mentioned earlier, the state water deliveries to Kachuma have also resumed. Snowpack is well above normal, which means that DWR is providing Article 21 deliveries and expects to have those continue through June. Metropolitan Water District, still in the process of reconciling the numbers at this point. We expect to get about 1,400 acre feet back out of the 4,500 we put in. And later this year, we'll be considering whether we use some of our Table A water to pay back AVEC, some of our water debt that we owe to AVEC, or put it into other groundwater banking programs. That will all depend on, I think, once we get the final numbers on the Metropolitan deal, we'll have a better sense of how much water we'll have in San Luis. The risk of leaving it in San Luis is that it might spill next year. The conditions are a lot different than it was earlier in the drought when San Luis was very low. I think I'll skip some of this. So desalination, we have major construction is complete, and seawater has been circulating through the plant since February. This Friday, we expect that the RO membranes will be loaded, and then the 14-day acceptance testing is anticipated to begin May 4th, which is a 14-day period. So we could have our desalination water going into the system by mid-May.
A little more clarification. The way that 14-day testing works, when they start it, they will have gotten DDW, Division of Drinking Water's approval already. And so during that acceptance testing, if the water meets all the requirements of the specifications, they very well could put it into the system during that acceptance testing period. And so there is some it could be earlier than mid-May at this point. So there's still a lot that needs to come together, but that's, we'll be watching that closely, and we'll be looking to do a press release as soon as we enter that acceptance periods testing.
Okay, our water supply strategy, again, we look 3 years out and assume continued drought conditions. This is based on a 30% conservation target. We're currently in the 6th year of drought, so we look out to 2019. We have desal coming online this spring. Really the big change in our water supply as a result of the rains we had this year is we're going to be using our Gibraltar water and maximizing use of Gibraltar this year. So that's this light blue here that wasn't previously available to us. Any Kachuma allocations we get this year will serve as contingency or backup supply, and we would likely carry it over for use next year.
Kelly, on that, it shows in 19 going back to groundwater.
Correct. I skipped over that slide earlier. Our groundwater basins are currently resting. We've shut down all of our wells. But we did have some remaining yield. Both basins were at about 30% of capacity. So if we can rest our basins now, that yield would be available for use in later years of the drought. So drought funding, just an update on Prop 1. On April 3rd, the state released draft guidelines for the desalination grant program. Up to $73 million is available for construction projects with the max project award of $10 million. So we viewed this as a great opportunity because our project really fulfills the goals and priorities of the program, which was really to improve our drought reliability and drought supplies. There are concerns over eligibility based on the timing of our project. The state is looking for a grant award before you complete the project, and since we're almost complete, most of our major construction is complete, the grant award would then be afterwards. So we will be submitting a comment letter to DWR on their draft guidelines, looking for them to change those eligibility dates, and also discussing with state elected officials. Senator Jackson has been closely involved and engaged with this, so we'll be reaching out to her office as well. The comment period ends May 12th, and then final guidelines on the grant program are expected in early June. And now I'll hand it over to Madeline Ward, our Water Conservation Supervisor, to talk about our water conservation updates.
Chair Kilburn and members of the commission, my name is Madeline Ward, and I have some quick conservation updates for you guys today. Every year we sponsor a special award at the Santa Barbara County Science Fair, and it's for projects that address water scarcity, water resource management, or water conservation. This year's winner for 2017 was Nev Greenwald of La Colina Junior High with her project called Harvesting Atmospheric Water. Her project, she measured the rate of evaporation on various surfaces to find the optimal hard surfaces that could collect and retain the most rainwater. We also had two runners-up, Emily Doreen, also of La Colina Junior High, and Noah Wetzel of Goleta Valley Junior High. So congratulations to our local budding water scientists. I also wanted to remind everyone about power outages and their effect on sprinkler timers. Edison has been doing work around the city this week and will continue to do more next week. So many customers may experience a brief power outage. Most sprinkler timers do have a backup battery basically underneath that first surface that you can see. Most of the time we find that these are missing or they're dead. And the purpose of that backup battery is if the power goes out, that battery remembers all of your programs. So if it's missing or dead, they'll go on default and it'll water every day, every station at midnight for 10 minutes. It will often double your water usage. So please remember to check your backup battery every year or replace it, and then check your timer after each power outage. I also wanted to promote 2 of our upcoming classes. We have Graywater 101 on Tuesday, May 2nd, and Rainwater Harvesting 101 on Thursday, May 11th. Both of them are from 7 to 8:30 p.m. at the Mackenzie Park building up at Mackenzie Park on State and Las Positas. They're taught by Sweetwater Collaborative and sponsored in part by the City of Santa Barbara.
Is there any questions?
Thank you.
No. All right. Thank you so much. All right. Let's close it out with the Water Resources Manager's report.
This should be in your packet, and just going to touch on some really key points, which were, I think Kelly already mentioned some of these. The demands, just where our community is right now is where we were in the 90s, and I think there's a lot to be said about a community that just because you do modestly increase the population doesn't necessarily correlate to a need for additional water. And I think that's what this graphic is helping to illustrate. Also, our GPCD goals, you look at the blue is a really good comparison, that 12-month running average, as compared to the red, the 2020 goal. I think that's really an impressive where as a community we're standing now. And then I'm skip to our spills. We're currently at 7 sewer spills. As you may recall, 3 of those occurred on February 17th during that 10-inch rain event, and which was deemed a 25-year rain event. They're still being reviewed by the Attorney's Office whether those qualify as part of our goal, which is 8 spills or less. I'm not trying to excuse those, but it will matter where we stand with our consent decree on this topic. Lisa Arroyo will be giving a presentation on May 2nd to Council on the consent decree and the annual report, and then she will following up in May to give that a similar presentation to the Water Commission. And other topics that are out there, and I just want to read your attention to, we're having several developments in town that are having issues with copper in their water. We are assisting with those issues, but at this point there's no evidence that there's an issue with the public water system. We've done extensive testing of our system for copper, and so it appears to be an issue with either the type of copper that was used. The state drinking water folks are involved and don't believe there's any issues on our end, but we are curious to find out what is causing the problem. And there is an article today in the paper on it, and just wanted to bring that to your attention in case you had any questions on that. And then also, as far as this water rates discussion, trying to push this thing along and get these rates implemented. There may be a need for a special Water Commission meeting to review those. Just looking ahead, I'm not sure we'll have a final set of rates to go over with you in May, and so we may have to schedule something in June. I don't know. I'm just setting the stage that it may be necessary.
Joshua, going to Mr. Jordan's comments, it's just speaking for myself. If there are issues like that, right, talk to the chair about special meetings, because I think I'd rather be involved than not be involved in that regard, and we'll do the best we can to get a special meeting. But I know for myself, I say issues like with the water rates and the timing that you're looking at, call the special meeting. Don't hesitate.
Yeah. There's just I agree. Just trying to reflect on the staffing resources we have. We're down well, my assistant is left, and so we're just kind of scrambling to make sure that we have adequate resources to pull together another meeting. And I know it's more time on your part, so, but I do appreciate that and your openness to accommodating that.
Super, thanks. Okay, but at the last meeting, I mentioned if we could have that chart that Tom put it up in his presentation, but it showed the water, the water allocation. I forget what he called it, but
The slabs.
the slabs, yeah.
And they're still producing that
Working on that.
graphic.
Yeah, we haven't received an updated version yet, but as soon as we do, the water accounting has been taking a little bit extra time, both from the Bureau and the state side. Interestingly, the Oroville issue ended up pulling a lot of resources, and so the water accounting took a little bit longer than usual.
Gee, you wonder why. All right, super. All right, next meeting is, where is it? May 18th. All right, meeting adjourned.